Well, hello, Pastor Brian here. We've been looking at Romans 8:28. What an amazing promise God has made to us who love him and have been called to faith in Jesus Christ. You know, here's how it goes, and we know all things work together for good to those that love God and have been called according to his purpose. Now, I mentioned before, I see four very comforting truths in that one verse. And last time I shared number one, and it was this. God has made a promise concerning you, Christian. It's to be claimed, not ignored. Now, that's very important. And we talked about that last time. This time, I want to look at number two. The second comforting statement I see in this verse, and it's this. God has a project concerning you. Now, this is really important. It's his. It's not yours. You know, William Ernest Henley penned a famous poem, English poem, back in the day called Invictus. And in that poem, he says, it matters not how straight the gate, how charged with punishments the scroll. I am the master of my fate. I am the captain of my soul. You know, I would have loved to have sat there on his deathbed and said, who's the captain of your soul? Who is the master of your fate? You know, it seems like birth and death we can sort of accept, but it's all the in-between that we seem to struggle with. Well, here's what God says about that in-between. Romans 8:28. All things work together for good to those that love God and have been called according to his purpose. You know what he's saying? This is my project from start to finish, and I'm going to take charge and do it every single step of the way. Now the question is, well, what is his project? Well, he tells us in the very next verse, verse 29, he says this, for whom he foreknew, he predestined to be conformed to the image of his Son, that he, his Son, might be the firstborn among many brethren. What is that project? It's literally conforming us to the image of Jesus Christ, to make us continually more Christ-like. Now, if that sounds almost kind of scary to you or just over the top, really, I want you to consider this. The night before Jesus was crucified, he was with his disciples. He had final words for his disciples before his crucifixion. And he said some very interesting things that night to his disciples. For instance, in John chapter 13, and it's chapter 13 through chapter 16, that he's ministering, he's speaking to his disciples. In chapter 13, it's where he says in verse 34, a new commandment I give unto you, that you love one another, grab this, as I have loved you, that you love one another. His love, the love of Christ. In the next chapter, chapter 14, he says this in verse 27, peace I leave with you. Now listen to this. My peace I give to you, not as the world gives, give I unto you. Let not your heart be troubled, neither let it be afraid. Oh, wouldn't that be wonderful? Never a troubled heart, never afraid. His peace filling our hearts. And then in chapter 15, he says in verse 11 of that chapter, these things I have spoken to you, here it is, that my joy may what? Remain in you, and that your joy may be made full. So he's talking about giving us his love, his peace, his joy. That's good stuff. God says his project, conform us to the image of Jesus Christ. You know, I can dig that. That's something that sounds like it's fullness of life, like God intended it to be. You know, I love what he says to Israel in Jeremiah chapter 18. He says this in the first 6 verses. Listen to this. The word which came to Jeremiah from the Lord, saying, Arise, go down to the potter's house, and there I will cause you to hear my words. Then I went down to the potter's house, and there he was, making something at the wheel. And the vessel that he made of clay was marred in the hand of the potter. So he made it again into another vessel, as it seemed good to the potter to make. Then the word of the Lord came to me, saying, O house of Israel, can I not do with you as this potter, says the Lord? Look, as the clay is in the potter's hand, so are you in my hand, O house of Israel. And you know, we believers as his children, that applies to us too. And I want you to notice here, the potter is in charge and the clay is in process. The clay's in process. And the potter is making that, remaking it. Like God is remaking us, gang. And he's remaking it so that he is pleased. That he is pleased. That's his project. So remember, you could put your name in there. As he says there in verse 6, look, the clay is in the potter's hand. So are you in my hand, oh Brian, oh Sam, oh Sally? God says, you're in my hand, and I'm doing the work. It's my project. So remember, you're not just a lump of clay. You are Christian. You are the potter's clay. And he has a project concerning you. And it is totally his project. It's not yours. So be comforted in the fact that God does indeed have a project concerning you. He does, Christian. And he is committed to fulfilling that project. You know, it reminds me of a verse in Philippians, chapter 1, verse 6, where we're told, being confident of this very thing, that he who has begun a good work in you will complete it unto the day of Jesus Christ. And so, brethren, this is what he is doing. Therefore, he says very, very confidently and pointedly and truthfully, all things now work together for good to those that love God and have been called according to his purpose. And we know that. We know all things work together for good because he's made a promise and because it's his project. So I would say, with that, I'd say, Christian, regardless of what's going on in your life, have a good day in the Lord, because he's got it. He's got it. And he's got you. God bless. Talk to you later.